In the dark, oppressive confines of a dimly lit interrogation room, Officer Rick Baxter sat across from Jamal Carter, his eyes cold and calculating. The air was thick with tension as Baxter's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and venomous. This wasn't a routine interrogation. It was a display of power, of one man's twisted desire to dominate another. Jamal, a young black man with a bright future, found himself caught in the crosshairs of a cop whose reputation was as notorious as it was protected. Baxter had spent years climbing the ranks, accumulating a file full of complaints, excessive force, racial profiling, harassment, but always managing to stay one step ahead of accountability. He harbored a deep-seated hatred for anyone who didn't fit his vision of what an American should be: white, compliant, and submissive. And tonight, with no witnesses around, Baxter's true nature was on full display. But what he didn't know was that every word, every blow, was being recorded, and that recording would soon be his downfall. Jamal's nightmare began on a quiet, deserted street as he was driving home late at night. The flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror made his heart sink. He knew who it was before he even pulled over: Officer Rick Baxter, a man notorious for his aggressive behavior towards minorities. As Baxter approached the car, his heavy boots echoing on the pavement, Jamal tried to stay calm. But the situation quickly escalated as Baxter's tone became more aggressive, dripping with disdain. Baxter wasn't just enforcing the law, he was exerting his power over a young black man he believed had no right to be driving a nice car late at night. Unbeknownst to Baxter, Jamal's car was equipped with a hidden dashboard camera, installed by his older brother Malik, who was concerned about the rising incidents of police brutality. As Baxter's tirade grew more hateful, accusing Jamal of everything from drug dealing to gang affiliation, the camera captured it all. Baxter's racist rant was laced with venom, his words cutting deep as he berated Jamal, his face inches away, spitting insults that were as brutal as the blows that would follow. Without warning, Baxter's words turned to violence. He reached through the open window, yanking Jamal out of the car with a force that sent him stumbling. The street was deserted. The only witnesses were the cold, distant stars and the unblinking eye of the camera. Baxter slammed Jamal against the hood of the car, the impact sending a shockwave of pain through his body. As Baxter twisted Jamal's arm behind his back, the crack of bone and sinew mingled with Jamal's cry of pain. Baxter's knee dug into Jamal's back as he cuffed him, his face pressed against the cold, hard surface of the car. But Baxter wasn't done. He delivered a series of punishing blows to Jamal's side, his fists landing with sickening thuds that echoed down the empty street. Jamal's body jerked with each hit, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Baxter stepped back, his chest heaving with exertion. He sneered down at Jamal, now crumpled on the ground, bruised, battered, and broken. Baxter spat on the ground beside him, a twisted satisfaction on his face, before dragging Jamal to his feet and shoving him into the back of the squad car. Back at the precinct, Baxter sat down at his desk, confident that his version of events would be the only one that mattered. He began typing out a false report, painting Jamal as the aggressor, claiming that he had been forced to use necessary force to subdue him. Baxter was certain that no one would question his account. Meanwhile, Jamal was enduring a nightmare of his own, locked in a holding cell, his pleas for medical attention ignored. He was surrounded by dangerous criminals, his fear palpable as he struggled to survive the night. But there was one person who wasn't buying Baxter's story: Detective Maria Ortiz from Internal Affairs. Ortiz had been keeping an eye on Baxter for a while, suspicious of his spotless record. When an anonymous tip landed on her desk, warning that Baxter's latest arrest wasn't as clean as it seemed, she knew she had to dig deeper. Ortiz began her investigation quietly, but as she pushed forward, she encountered resistance from within the department. Files went missing, witnesses became uncooperative, and higher-ups questioned her every move. It was clear that Baxter wasn't just a bad apple. He was part of a larger problem the department was desperate to keep hidden. But Ortiz was relentless. As she dug deeper, Baxter began to feel the walls closing in. Paranoia set in, and he started making late-night phone calls trying to cover his tracks. In a desperate bid to save himself, Baxter tried to destroy evidence, but the more he tried to clean up his mess, the more obvious his guilt became. Ortiz, meanwhile, was making progress. She uncovered a pattern of abuse in Baxter's past, linking him to other unsolved cases of police brutality. Victims who had been too afraid to speak out before now found their voices, and each testimony was another nail in Baxter's coffin. The breakthrough came when Ortiz found evidence linking Baxter to an old, unsolved case involving a young man who had died in custody. With the footage, the testimonies, and the mountain of evidence she'd gathered, Ortiz knew she had Baxter cornered. The day of his arrest, Baxter was caught off guard in his own home, surrounded by officers who had once been his colleagues. The arrest was violent and chaotic, reflecting the brutality Baxter had inflicted on so many others. The trial was the stuff of nightmares for Baxter. The courtroom was packed, and all eyes were on him as Jamal took the stand. His testimony a powerful indictment of Baxter's cruelty. When the footage was played, the courtroom fell silent. The horror of Baxter's actions laid bare for all to see. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear: guilty on all charges. Baxter's downfall sent shockwaves through the community. The man who had once wielded power with such arrogance was now just another criminal, stripped of his badge and his freedom. As the cell door slammed shut behind him, Baxter knew that he would never walk out a free man again. Meanwhile, Jamal, though vindicated, struggled with the trauma of the incident. He became a symbol of resilience, speaking out against police brutality and advocating for reform. The fallout from the Baxter case shook the police department to its core. Policies were rewritten, new training programs introduced, and the blue wall of silence that had protected bad cops like Baxter began to crumble. The case sparked a nationwide conversation about racism and accountability in law enforcement, and the fight for justice continued. As the dust settled, one thing became clear: justice isn't always simple or satisfying, but it's crucial. The story of Rick Baxter and Jamal Carter is a reminder of the ongoing struggle against systemic racism and the importance of holding systems accountable. It's a journey that requires constant vigilance and a willingness to stand up against injustice, no matter the cost. In the end, we can't change the past, but we can learn from it and use it to fuel our determination to keep pushing forward for a better, fairer world. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.